Philippine and Chinese vessels collided near the Second Thomas Shoal in the South China Sea on Monday, the Chinese Coast Guard said, as Beijing steps up efforts to push its claims over the disputed area. Known in Chinese as the Ren'ai Reef, the Second Thomas Shoal has seen an escalating number of confrontations between Chinese and Philippine ships in recent months. These have often taken place during Philippine attempts to supply a garrison of Philippine troops on a grounded Navy vessel, the Sierra Madre, aimed at asserting Manila's claims to the reef. The shoal lies about 200 kilometers, 120 miles, from the western Philippine island of Palawan and more than 1,000 kilometers from China's nearest major landmass, Hainan Island. The Chinese Coast Guard said that a Philippine resupply ship in the area had ignored many solemn warnings from the Chinese side. It approached the Chinese vessel in an unprofessional way, resulting in a collision, Beijing said. Beijing accused the ship of having illegally broken into the sea near Ren'ai Reef in China's Nansha Islands. The Chinese Coast Guard took control measures against the Philippine ship in accordance with the law. Manila, in response, said it would not dignify the deceptive and misleading claims of the China Coast Guard. The main issue remains the illegal presence and actions of Chinese vessels within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone, which infringes on our sovereignty and sovereign rights, the Armed Forces of the Philippines said in a statement. The continued aggressive actions of the CETG are escalating tensions in the region, it added. Beijing claims almost the entirety of the South China Sea, brushing aside competing claims from several Southeast Asian nations, including the Philippines, and an international ruling that its stance has no legal basis. It deploys Coast Guard and other boats to patrol the waters, and has turned several reefs into militarized artificial islands. And it has in recent months stepped up moves against Philippine vessels in the area around the shoal. This month, Manila accused Chinese boats of illegally seizing food and medicine airdropped to the Philippine outpost in the area. It was the first time supplies had been seized, the military said. Chinese personnel on the boats later dumped the items in the water, Philippine Navy spokesman for the West Philippine Sea Commodore Roy Vincent Trinidad said. It was not clear if they belonged to the Chinese Coast Guard or Navy, the military said. China in response insisted the Sierra Madre was illegally grounded on the reef and urged the Philippines to stop making trouble. Dangerous incursions. On Saturday, new Chinese Coast Guard rules took effect under which it can detain foreigners for alleged trespassing in the disputed sea. Manila has accused the Chinese Coast Guard of barbaric and inhumane behavior against Philippine vessels, and President Ferdinand Marcos has called the new rules a very worrisome escalation. China has defended its new Coast Guard rules. A foreign ministry spokesman said last month they were intended to better uphold order at sea. Chinese Coast Guard vessels have used water cannon against Philippine boats multiple times in the contested waters. There have also been collisions that injured Philippine troops. The Group of Seven bloc on Friday criticized what it called dangerous incursions by China in the South China Sea. Confrontations between China and the Philippines have raised fears of a wider conflict over the sea that could involve the United States and other allies. Trillions of dollars in shipborne trade passes through the South China Sea annually, and huge unexploited oil and gas deposits are believed to lie under its seabed, though estimates vary greatly. China has been at odds with many other countries in the Asia-Pacific for years over its sweeping maritime claims, including almost all of the South China Sea, a strategic and resource-rich waterway around which Beijing has drawn a 10-dash line on official maps to delineate what it says is its territory. Beijing is in the midst of a massive military expansion and has become increasingly assertive in pursuing its claims, giving rise to more frequent direct confrontations, primarily with the Philippines, though it is also involved in long-time territorial disputes with Vietnam, Taiwan, Malaysia, and Brunei. A 2016 arbitration ruling by a United Nations tribunal invalidated Beijing's claims in the South China Sea, but China did not participate in the proceedings and rejected the ruling. At stake are fishing rights, access to undersea oil reserves, and other natural resources, as well as the possibility of establishing military outposts. The US, a treaty partner with the Philippines, has raised concerns about China's actions, and President Joe Biden has pledged ironclad support for Manila. That sparked fears that if an incident escalates, it could spark a wider conflict. In the latest incident, a Chinese vessel and a Philippine supply ship collided near the disputed Spratly Islands in the South China Sea on Monday. China's Coast Guard said a Philippine supply ship entered waters near the Second Thomas Shoal, a submerged reef in the Spratly Islands that's part of territory claimed by several nations. The Philippine military called the Chinese Coast Guard's report deceptive and misleading. Here's a look at some other incidents and developments in recent months. June 4. Philippine officials say the Chinese Coast Guard seized food dropped for Filipino naval personnel on an outpost on Second Thomas Shoal. Philippine Gen Romeo Brawner says the Chinese may have suspected the packages contained construction materials intended to reinforce the rusty Philippine Navy ship deliberately run aground at Second Thomas Shoal to serve as a Philippine outpost. May 16. About 100 Filipino activists on wooden boats changed plans to distribute food to Filipinos based on the Second Thomas Shoal after being shadowed by Chinese Coast Guard ships through the night. Instead, they distribute food packs and fuel southeast of the disputed territory. April 30. Chinese Coast Guard ships fire water cannons at 2 Philippine patrol vessels near the Scarborough Shoal, another hotly disputed area where tensions have flared on and off. Philippine officials say water cannons could damage their ships' engines or even capsize the smaller vessels. China called its move a necessary measure, accusing the Philippines of violating China's sovereignty. China also reinstalled a floating barrier across the entrance to the shoal's vast fishing lagoon. April 23. A Chinese Coast Guard ship blocks a Philippine patrol vessel near Second Thomas Shoal, causing a near collision. Before the incident, a Chinese naval vessel had shadowed 2 Philippine patrol boats as they cruised near Subi, one of 7 barren reefs in the Spratly Islands that China has transformed in the last decade into a missile-protected island military outpost. Subi is also claimed by Vietnam and Taiwan. March 23. Chinese Coast Guard hits Philippine supply boat with water cannons near Second Thomas Shoal, injuring crew members and damaging the vessel, Philippine officials say. China says the Philippines intruded into its territorial waters despite repeated warnings. March 5. Chinese and Philippine Coast Guard vessels are involved in a minor collision off the Second Thomas Shoal, and 4 Filipino crew members are injured when China blasts a supply boat with water cannons, shattering its windshield. China's Coast Guard says the Philippine ships were illegally intruding in the area's waters and accused one of them of ramming a Chinese vessel. January 12. Filipino fishing boat captain says Chinese Coast Guard drives him away from Scarborough Shoal, forces him to dump his catch into the sea. December 9, 2023. The Chinese Coast Guard surrounds a supply ship, blasts it with a water cannon in the area around Second Thomas Shoal. The head of the Philippine military, who was aboard the supply boat, says they were also bumped by a Chinese ship. November 10, 2023. China blasts Philippine supply ship with water cannon near Second Thomas Shoal. China says it acted appropriately under maritime law to defend its territory. October 22, 2023. A Chinese Coast Guard ship and accompanying vessel ram Philippine Coast Guard ship and a military-run supply boat near the Second Thomas Shoal. Chinese Coast Guard says the Philippine vessels trespassed into what it said were Chinese waters. September 26, 2023. The Philippine Coast Guard says it removed a floating barrier from blocking the entrance to the lagoon at the Scarborough Shoal, put in place by China to prevent Filipino fishing boats from entering. China would later replace the barrier. The ongoing collisions and confrontations between Philippine and Chinese vessels near the Second Thomas Shoal underscore the escalating tensions in the South China Sea. Despite its rich natural resources and strategic importance, this region remains a hotbed of territorial disputes, primarily driven by China's expansive maritime claims. The recent incident, wherein a Philippine supply ship collided with a Chinese vessel, highlights the fragile state of affairs and the potential for these conflicts to escalate further. China's aggressive tactics, including new Coast Guard rules allowing the detention of foreigners and the use of water cannons against Philippine boats, reflect its determination to assert control over the disputed areas. The Philippines, backed by international allies like the United States, continues to resist these moves, emphasizing its sovereign rights and condemning China's actions as violations of international law. As tensions rise, the risk of a broader conflict involving multiple nations looms large. The South China Sea, with its vital shipping lanes and untapped natural resources, remains a critical focal point for regional stability. Resolving these disputes peacefully and through adherence to international law is imperative to avoid further escalation and ensure the security and prosperity of the region. Thank you for watching. Kindly like and subscribe for more.